Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we are finally going to be talking about the newest album from Mariah Carey called Caution. So I got a lot of backlash the last time I reviewed Mariah Carey, and while there are times I've gone back to old reviews and kind of winced, this was never one of them. Mostly because I'd like to think that my opinion on Mariah Carey isn't all that controversial. She was fantastic in the 90s, 4 or 5 excellent albums, and then it kind of went awry in the 2000s. I mean, you can argue where and when things went wrong, but even some fans had to realize that by the end of the decade, it was not looking or sounding nearly as good as it once did. So she did the smart thing. She took some time off to recharge for her 2014 album. And look, it's not a bad album, but through the combination of poor guest star choices, haphazard writing, and production that rarely ever lived up to her promise, it was a comeback that felt kind of abortive. And while #Beautiful remains a great song with Miguel, you could go and make the argument that nobody's going back to that album in the same way they do her 90s or even 2000s work. And when you couple it with that New Year's Eve performance a couple years back, look, you can't tarnish Mariah's legacy, but beyond the diehard fan base, I don't really know who was asking for another album. But hey, we got another one. And I'll freely admit, I was really curious about this. It didn't seem too long. The production credits, they were all over the place, but potentially promising. And while I was dreading the Gunna collaboration deep in the track list, the critical reviews have not looked this good for Mariah Carey since the 90s. In other words, I was looking for really any excuse to like a new Mariah Carey album, and I'd certainly prefer it if Ariana Grande got some competition in mainstream pop and R&B, so what do we get with Caution? Alright, here's the frustrating thing. I will state right out of the gate, this is probably the most I've enjoyed a Mariah Carey album since the 90s, hell, probably since before Glitter. It's an album that tries to play for restraint, and while I'd hesitate to call it a mature R&B release, it is playing to Mariah's subtler strengths in a way that we haven't seen in some time. But at the same time, I don't want to oversell the hype here, because for as good as it is, I would not call it great either. It's just not on the level of her 90s output, and I can't be the only one who thinks that this album is a bit of a safe bet in a few places where I thought Mariah could go for broke. I'd also add that it doesn't quite have the obvious standout like #Beautiful, but I will say it's probably a more cohesive and better project than her 2014 album, albeit a more down-tempo and restrained one, and that means she's gonna have a very different audience for this. And in a funny way, it actually makes talking about the album a little bit easier, as outside of a fair few extended breakdowns like on Giving Me Life off of Blood Orange's guitar touches and 8th Grade off of Timbaland's ad-libs, this album sticks to a pretty straightforward production formula. A pretty sparse, often desaturated keyboard line, trap percussion, but not usually overmixed or oily, and then giving Mariah the space her delicate cooing and her upper register and her multi-track vocals really need. Perhaps not quite as plush and soft as I would prefer for her tone as you got in the 90s, but more often than not, it's a formula that works for her. It comes through best in the piano ballads, from the heartbreaking Portrait that closes off the album, to even the DJ Mustard produced track With You, which is another strong song because it's got a clarity and space that Mariah can make full use of without losing her foundation. And you know what, to her credit, Mariah Carey isn't trying to sell the huge power ballads this time around either. Delicate control and restraint is the name of the game here. And while you often get a couple whistle note moments, they're often reserved for the outros. They're not the centerpiece. And that poise as a performer, it's arguably the biggest selling point of this album. Even if you can tell that Mariah Carey's voice has suffered a little bit of wear over the years, she's smart enough to play within her comfort zone. And she's got a loose enough comfort with a trap cadence to glide over these beats effortlessly, especially when she's having a little bit more fun, like on One Mo Gen and the coy flirtation of the title track that actually turned out really well. Now granted, the problem when Mariah Carey is on her A game is that you wind up seeing where everybody else manages to slip up, and sadly there are some missteps both in the production and the guest stars. Let's get this out of the way right now. Stay Long Love You is easily the worst song here, mostly because with its cheap grainy blips and the thin percussion, it sounds more like a mediocre Gunna instrumental than anything Mariah should ever touch, even as she proves surprisingly game with it. But then there's Giving Me Life with Slick Rick, and while his verse works for the faded love story of the song, he doesn't quite add enough to really elevate the track either. Same with the Biggie sample on A No-No, which feels clunky in how it's inserted into the song as kind of like a bridge. Then there's The Distance with Dolla, and honestly I'm of two minds on it. On the one hand, I have heard Dolla give much more soulful and powerful vocals in 2018, and I'm not quite sure he stepped up to match Mariah Carey's magnetism or charisma. But on the other hand, outside of that unnecessary cheerleading champ, Skrillex's production is such a great fit for Mariah Carey's cadence and timbre that I'm just about convinced they should do an EP together off this song alone. It clicked remarkably well. Sadly, not all the production quite works as well. Even with the no scrubs interpolation, I didn't quite love the spikier synth line on A No-No, and until the guitars kicked in, I wasn't really wild about the flat blaring tones and Giving Me Love either. Not again bad songs, but they didn't quite click as much as I would like. But now we've got the content, and look, I've always found myself a bit at a loss when it comes to talking about Mariah Carey's lyrics. They've always felt a little bit underwritten or filled up with some odd details that don't quite add up to the nuance of which I'm hoping, especially given how much Mariah Carey has written herself. And I'm still not quite sold on her petty side like on GTFO. It's not a bad song by any stretch, but as you think for as delicate and cooing as Mariah is selling it, the harder language just feels a little odd coming from her. You would expect something a little bit more poetic, especially given how Mariah is referencing expensive wine by the label in the song itself. Similar case for A No-No, a kiss off to her ex-manager that starts to become more about brand name flexing than actually detailing his transgressions against her. And yes, I get she doesn't want to give him any attention, but maybe then don't write the song all about him. Really, where I found Mariah Carey more effective is just the straightforward love and sex songs like The Distance or With You, or the playful hookup of One More Gen in the title track. A little bit less effective is 8th Grade, where she tries to assess how ready a guy is to be serious with her, but not intrude on her personal space, which I think I would have liked a little bit better if it wasn't titled 8th Grade, implying a much younger context than I think was really necessary here. But thankfully, the album ends really strongly with Portrait, probably the best song here. A revealing but powerful song where Mariah Carey reflects on life in the spotlight, the pain she has endured throughout the decades, and her inability to truly showcase or process it with the image that she's maintained for so long, especially in her art. And on the one hand, well, it's hard to ignore the points where Mariah Carey might share some culpability with that with some missteps in recent years. But on the other hand, the song is so genuinely great to make me sympathize with her, and that's a big credit to her as a songwriter and an artist. But as a whole, look, for as much as anybody was looking for a Mariah Carey album in late 2018, this is a really good project. Easily her best in over 15 years, and showing that there is space in modern and mainstream R&B for her that shows her comfort with those tones while still showcasing her strengths. About the best thing you could hope for out of a comeback album, if you want to call it that. It's not a great project, but it is worth a listen if you're curious, so I'm giving it a solid 7 out of 10 and a recommendation. And if this is the start of a true second win for Mariah Carey, well, you know what? I'm on board. Let's see what happens. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. Like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Yeah, I was surprised how much I liked this, but hey, the poll's up there. I'm curious where you guys all fall on it, and I know you guys are gonna give me some shit for not loving it, but there's your opportunity to tell me. Beyond that, if you guys want to buy or stream the album, links down there below. Anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process, help support the channel, so I could have covered this earlier in the week, link to my Patreon right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right over there. If you want to see my schedule, it's on my Instagram, link down there below. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.